never heard any discussion of the 25th Amendment, and I would never expect to.
This is New Day with Allison Camerata and John Berman.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It is Friday, February 15th. We're still in red. Valentine's Day never ends for John Berman.
It's a permanent state of mind.
It really is. In just hours, President Trump is expected to announce that he is declaring a national emergency to reallocate $8 billion to fund his border wall, bypassing Congress. Under Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, only Congress has the power to appropriate funds. The bipartisan spending deal passed by Congress last night gives the president a fraction of the money that he wanted and only fencing and barriers, not a wall. So he's now taking matters into his own hands. Democrats vow to challenge the president's emergency action. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is warning the president that his move will set a dangerous precedent.
So you know who else warns that this type of action is dangerous? Mike Pence.
Well, I think it would be a profound mistake for the President of the United States to overturn American immigration law with the stroke of a pen.
So that was Mike Pence. 2014, Mike Pence thinks it's a bad idea to go around Congress. 2014, Mike Pence warns about the abuse of executive authority. 2014, Mike Pence and 2014 Republicans battled then President Obama in public and in court over similar actions. But 2019 Mike Pence and many 2019 Republicans are already saying, thank you, Sean Hannity, may I have another? Not all Republicans agree, though. Overnight, the Wall Street Journal editorial board came out against this, and some key senators have expressed reservations. This will end up in court for sure, facing near certain delays at a minimum. Plus, breaking news overnight, something you almost never see, a top active duty commander publicly disagreeing with the president. The top commander of U.S. forces in the Middle East publicly breaking with the president over his decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria, saying the terror group ISIS is far from defeated. We have a lot to cover. Let's begin with CNN's Joe Johns, live for us at the White House. Joe.
Well, John, the good news is there apparently is not going to be another government shutdown. And today in the Rose Garden, the president is expected to sign off on at least a couple things. Obviously, he's going to sign that legislation that's just been passed on Capitol Hill. And he's also going to sign off on executive action up to and including the declaration of a national emergency in order to get his border wall built on the southwest border. That's basically going to be compiling together something like $8 billion from different sources in order to get it done. Here's a breakdown of where that money is supposed to come from. It's $1.375 billion in the Homeland Security Appropriations bill you know of, $600 million from the Treasury Department's Drug Forfeiture Fund, $2.5 billion in the Defense Department's Drug Interdiction Program, $3.5 billion from the Defense Department's military construction budget. And that, of course, is what's going to require the declaration of a national emergency. Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, had been opposed to this idea and talked about that publicly, but understanding that the White House was going to need his sign-off in order to get this thing through, McConnell changed his position. Listen.
He's prepared to sign the bill. He will also be issuing a national emergency declaration at the same time. And I've indicated to him that I'm going to support the national emergency declaration.
Now, there are some Republican senators who are opposed to this idea, Marco Rubio, Susan Collins, some others, who are afraid that when a Democratic president gets in, he can turn the tables by declaring some emergency that Republicans don't like. There's also, of course, a possibility that the United States Congress, with a vote of both the House as well as the Senate, can essentially rescind the declaration of a national emergency. But the president could also veto that. So a lot of action scheduled here on Capitol Hill and in the White House today. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Joe, for setting all of that up. Joining us now to talk about it, we have Joe Lockhart. He, of course, was the press secretary in the Clinton White House. We have Ann Milgram. She was previously New Jersey's Attorney General. And Doug Heye. He was previously communications director for the Republican National Committee. Doug, I want to start with you.
Uh-oh.
Remember, Doug, just a few years ago, as Joe was pointing out, when Republicans went ballistic with what they thought was President Obama's presidential overreach. And if you don't remember it, we have something handy called videotape that can remind everyone of how they felt very recently. Watch this.
The action he's proposed would ignore the law, would reject the voice of the voters, and would impose new unfairness on law-abiding immigrants, all without solving the problem.
We, the Senate, are waiting in our duty to stop this lawless administration and its unconstitutional amnesty.
Immigration reform is an emotional and divisive issue. There's no doubt about that. But the president's unilateral actions to bypass Congress undermine the Constitution and threaten our democracy.
Lawless administration, unconstitutional. Doug, what has happened to that sentiment?
Well, I remember this not just from the videotape, but quite often I'd help draft the statements, whether at the Republican National Committee or working in House leadership for then Majority Leader Eric Cantor. And what's happened is, I think what we've seen so often over the past few years in politics is that tribalism rules the day, and it's okay if my side does it. And what I would caution my Republican friends on is, remember what Mitch McConnell said to Harry Reid when Harry Reid went with the nuclear option. He said, "Be careful what you wish for. This will have broad implications." And at some point, I think it's safe to assume there will be another Democratic president. That Democratic president now has a precedent that they can look at, the Trump precedent. And we know that once you cross a threshold, you never fully cross back. And so it's very easy to see, and Nancy Pelosi has intimated this, or said it outright, that the next Democratic president could do this on climate or on guns or something else. Republicans, be careful what you wish for here.
Just to put a fine point on this, Doug, it was your job to get ticked off at this type of thing when you worked for the Republican National Committee and Eric Cantor, correct? This
Absolutely.
was your job. And there's a word, I think, for Republicans now who don't feel the way that they felt 5 years ago when they stated these things, isn't there?
I think there is. Look, certainly you can say circumstances change in politics and you deal with what's in front of you at this given moment. But it's disappointing to know Republicans had said so often, and again, I would help draft some of these statements and send them to you and Allison, that we've done a total 180 on this. And again, be careful what you wish for. This may feel good right now, although to a lot of senators and House members on the Republican side, it doesn't, especially given that the criticisms that have come from the Democrats really are almost buttresses to argue for the bill and not to do the emergency move. This will have implications once there's not a Republican president that Republicans will not like.
Is there a particular word you were thinking of?
He didn't say it out loud. I think the word is hypocrite.
Oh, I thought of that.
I was too busy banging my head against the wall.
That's a hyphenated
That's a lot of
word,
words.
but they've made the same thing.
And is there a difference between what President Obama did with executive action and an emergency declaration legally?
There is. There's an enormous difference. The president does have authority to issue executive orders, and they do that. An emergency declaration is basically circumventing the funding that has been decided by Congress.
Funding is a difference. This is about the allocation of funds.
Which has already been done. And in our country, we have separation of powers. The president has some powers, the Congress has others. And essentially, to do this, there has to be an unusual and extraordinary threat. And the president has made no, in my opinion, has made no factual basis to support this kind of extraordinary and, in my view, unconstitutional action.
But the other difference between executive action and declaring an emergency is the emergency is declared through a congressional act. It's the 1976 National Emergency Act. So what you will hear from White House lawyers and many legal scholars is there may be a leg to stand on here as this goes through the courts, because this is power that Congress gave the president.
Right. So there is a congressional law, but keep in mind that the United States Constitution trumps the laws. And so you cannot have a law that basically circumvents separation of powers. And so the question is, number one, is this a true emergency that justifies this type of action? We've watched now for months where they've been having political debates. The president could not do through Congress what he is now trying to go around Congress to do. And to me, it sets us up to basically have a president who can fund anything and do anything he wants. And that's not the way that the United States government should work. So we'll see what the courts do. But I think it's deeply problematic.
Do you want to show your favorite graphic?
Well, it's just, again, the issue of an emergency here. This is a chart that I like to show. This is illegal border crossings in the United States. So look at 2018, at or near an historic low of illegal border crossings. That is when the president says it's an emergency. It's an emergency when there are fewer illegal border crossings now than there were in the year 2000. So the year 2000, 2001, 2002, when there are many, many more border crossings, not an emergency, now an emergency.
I mean, you can also make the point that it wasn't an emergency for the past 720 days. When the president, when Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, they could have done something. Why now?
Well, and you can also make the case that in an emergency situation, you wouldn't expect the president to go to Mar-a-Lago and play golf the weekend before and the weekend after he declares it. I think you got to take one step back and look at this. This started as a Roger Stone mnemonic device for the president, the border wall. And it has been built to this point on lie upon lie upon lie. We're going to build this wall that's going to go 2,000 miles. We're going to get Mexico to pay for it. We're going to get a trade agreement to pay for it. Well, it's not really a wall, it's steel slats. You can just, it's one thing on another. But to me, the most stunning thing here is, Trump is Trump. There's not much we can do about it. But the Senate Majority Leader has now just shown how impotent the Republican Party is to stand up to their president.
It's stunning to watch what has happened with Mitch McConnell. And this is not, we don't even have to go back to 2014. Yeah. We can go back 3 weeks to watch his about face. So let's play how Mitch McConnell used to feel about an emergency declaration and how he feels now.
I'm for whatever works, which means avoiding a shutdown and avoiding the president feeling he should declare a national emergency. The national emergencies that have been issued in the past have not been contentious. I'm pretty sure that this one would be. And I've indicated to him that I'm going to support the national emergency declaration.
That's in the space of about 2 weeks.
Yeah, and it's, this is Trump taking the view that 2020 is going to be about immigration, and he's going to make it about the wall. This will probably get stuck in the courts, so he'll be able to say, the Democrats are keeping me from building the wall. And it's almost like he slept through 2018. That's what the midterm elections were about. And again, it's sometimes in politics, lie upon lie works. But we're going to have an election to find out about.
Again, and Doug, I just want to put a point here. I happen to think that legally speaking, there's an argument that the president and his allies can make, and maybe they will win in court. But being legal and being the right thing to do, that's a different argument here. And when you're talking about the separation of powers, and you're talking about traditions, and you're talking about what some people consider to be an abuse of power, a president going around Congress, it is a major, major action. And it needs to be noted.
It does, and this is a long-term problem, and this is a problem that's gone on for a long time before this point, where Congress has continually ceded its authority to the executive. That was true under President Obama, certainly under President Bush, and well before that. And ultimately, when we talk about having a working appropriations process, it's not really the sexiest issue, but I would tell your viewers, look at the segment that Dana Bash produced on Nita Lowey, the new appropriations chair, and Kay Granger, the new ranking member. The first time two women have helmed a committee, the Appropriations Committee. That's how we avoid these things in the future. If we have a working appropriations process, we don't have this shutdown. We don't get to the place where we have these kinds of emergency declarations and so forth. It's not the sexiest thing in the world. It frankly is Congress doing its job instead of ceding its own authority to the executive and ruining or really stepping back from separation of powers time and time again.
One last note, because Donald Trump used to feel this way very strongly. He, as a deal maker, would never have to rely on the executive overreach that President Obama did. Here was his tweet. Republicans must not allow President Obama to subvert the Constitution of the U.S. for his own benefit and because he is unable to negotiate with Congress. I just leave you on that note.
Is that the same guy as president now?
It actually is. We checked that. We fact-checked that.
All right, thank you all. Breaking news, a top U.S. general leading the war against ISIS in Syria is publicly breaking with President Trump. This is a major deal. You almost never hear an active duty commander splitting with the president in public. What's going on here? We have a live report. This is a CNN exclusive next.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We do have some breaking news right now. This is first on CNN. The top commander of U.S. forces in the Middle East is publicly breaking with President Trump. General Joseph Votel, who leads the war against ISIS, tells CNN in a new interview that he disagrees with President Trump's decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria and insists the terror group is not defeated. CNN's Barbara Starr, who just interviewed the general and is the only TV correspondent traveling with him, joins us live from Oman with all of the breaking news. What did he tell you, Barbara?
Well, Allison, good morning to you from Oman in the Persian Gulf. General Votel, very candid, very blunt. You might be a bit surprised about what he had to say.
It would not have been my military advice at that particular time.
The top U.S. commander in the war against ISIS flatly disagreed with President Trump's decision to pull out of Syria. In an exclusive interview with CNN, General Joseph Votel says it's too soon to bring U.S. troops home.
I would not have made that suggestion, frankly.
President
against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly.
Votel aligning himself with the U.S. intelligence community assessment that despite significant advances, there are Secretary James Mattis to resign last year. Last week, Votel made a stunning revelation that the president did not consult him on the decision to withdraw.
Certainly, we are aware that he has expressed a desire and intent in the past to depart Iraq.
So you weren't consulted before that decision was announced?
We were not. I was not consulted.
Nonetheless, Votel emphasizing he is carrying out the president's orders. This morning, Votel stressed military pressure must be maintained.
This threat on their own without our assistance, that will be another key criteria indicating to me that we have accomplished our mission of defeat of ISIS.
And as you sit here today?
No, we're not there. No, we're not there on terms of that.
Votel adding that he believes Iran still remains the biggest long-term threat to the more significant weapon.
It shouldn't be lost on anybody that an advanced ballistic missile program could also be used to move weapons of mass destruction or do things like could very easily be converted over for that.
You know, I think it's important to understand who Joe Votel is. This isn't just any general in the U.S. Army. 39 years of service. He's about to retire in the coming weeks. Most of his career spent in Special Operations Forces. When you get to this level in the U.S. military, your best military advice usually centers around you leave when the job is done. He does not feel the job is done. John?
Yeah, Barbara, I can't think of a time like this. It's very unusual for a general like Votel to publicly split with the president, so the entire world knows that he doesn't agree with the decision that's made here. Still, though, he did make clear he will carry out the order to pull the troops out, yes?
Absolutely. You know, does not agree with the decision at the time, but what has happened since is Joe Votel is a four-star general. He carries out the president's orders. We saw it with Jim Mattis. If you can't carry out the order, you have to leave. Joe Votel is a loyal Army general. He is carrying out the president's orders, but he, you know, to be clear, he's also waiting to see what develops in the coming weeks, whether there might be additional decisions about how to move ahead, how to still support the U.S.-backed fighters in Syria and try and help them out. What he doesn't want is to leave them to a potential bloodbath, and he does not want ISIS to come back. John, Allison?
Barbara, thank you very much for that exclusive reporting. All right, startling revelations from former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe's new book. And it is not just about the president. What he says about former Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Next.
This is CNN Breaking News.
New revelations this morning. The book coming out by fired Deputy FBI Director Andy McCabe. Not only does he say that justice officials talked about ways to remove the president back in 2017, but he all but calls Jeff Sessions a racist, and he says the president was getting some of his intelligence from Vladimir Putin. Joining us, Laura Jarrett, a CNN Justice reporter, Josh Campbell, former FBI supervisory special agent who worked with Andy McCabe, and Greg Brower. He previously was a U.S. attorney and also served as assistant director for the Office of Congressional Affairs at the FBI. He, too, worked with Andrew McCabe. And Greg, I want to start with you on the 25th Amendment point. We knew this yesterday. This was the first thing to come out from the book. McCabe says there were discussions inside Justice about how they might go forward if they needed to with the 25th Amendment, which is how you remove the president from office if a majority of the cabinet votes so. The question looming over this for so many people is, was it just the firing of James Comey that made McCabe and others ask this question? Was that enough to have a discussion about the 25th Amendment, or were there other things that they were looking at? Was there other information they had that made this discussion in their minds so relevant?
John, that's a very good question, and I suspect the answer is that there was more, and likely much more, that was underlying that discussion. Of course, we don't know the exact contours of that discussion. We don't know who initiated it. We don't know exactly how it ended. We do know that there was obviously no real effort beyond a meeting to pursue a 25th Amendment type scenario. But it will be interesting to hear more from both McCabe and others who were in that meeting about exactly why it came up, how it came up, and what happened with the idea.
And we'll supposedly hear more on 60 Minutes when they obviously play the full interview on Sunday. Here's another shocker. In McCabe's book, he talks about President Trump again believing Vladimir Putin over the evidence. Here is this excerpt. Trump dismissed the July 2017 missile launch as a hoax. This is for North Korea. McCabe writes, he thought that North Korea did not have the capability to launch such missiles. He said he knew this because Vladimir Putin had told him so. Josh, I don't even know where to begin with. This is the U.S. president where he's getting his information.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the Putin angle there, which is startling. But I think as with the 25th Amendment discussion, a lot of that's going to come down to context and were there others there that can actually corroborate. I think with a lot of this book, it's going to turn into a he said, and a lot of it is unknowable as far as what the actual context was. I know we all know that there's no love lost between Andy McCabe and Rod Rosenstein, and certainly no love lost between Andy McCabe and the president. We know the president and the White House, they're going to come out and say that because Andy McCabe, lied to the Inspector General, these are all lies, and so I think they're going to be refuted. But again, until we hear some other type of corroboration about what this context was, it'll really be hard to really nail down what the president was saying, what Andy McCabe heard, and what it all meant.
Laura, let me read you a response from the Justice Department yesterday, and I think it's notable in and of itself that Justice Proper decided to put out an official statement about the leaks from the Andy McCabe book and the interview he was doing. Justice says, as the Deputy Attorney General, and this is Rod Rosenstein, previously has stated, based on his personal dealings with the president, there is no basis to invoke the 25th Amendment, nor was the Deputy Attorney General in a position to consider invoking the 25th Amendment. Now, I will note, as a careful parser of statements, that doesn't say there weren't discussions inside Justice where it came up. But it does get back to the question I asked Greg before. Again, this will come down to whether or not there was concern and reason for concern beyond firing James Comey, or whether this was a bunch of plotters behind some kind of coup.
You are a careful reader, John, and I think in this instance you are really on the money here. So Justice, if they could say he didn't say it, they would say that. Instead, they're saying he never pursued it, he never advocated for it, he never had reason to think he could invoke it. All to say, none of the discussions really matter. What really mattered is that he never actually wore a wire. What really mattered is they weren't actually calling up General Kelly to try to figure out whether they could get him on board with it. I said that's their pivot here because that's their one place to go. But I think the larger issue that both Greg and Josh are speaking to is there was an atmosphere described not only by McCabe, but we've also now seen from the former general counsel of the FBI describing how officials at the top level were concerned that the president was doing things that seemed to benefit Russia. And they didn't know whether it was completely innocent. Baker says it could have been completely innocent, but they were worried about a worst-case scenario. And that worst-case scenario meant that he was compromised. And because of that, they took an extraordinary step, which they're now obviously being criticized for by President Trump's supporters. But at least it wasn't just McCabe. And I think that's an important point to make.
Do we want to hear more excerpts of the inflammatory variety?
Yes.
All right. This is from Andrew McCabe's new book. This is about Jeff Sessions. He writes that back in the old days, Jeff Sessions said, you all only hired Irishmen. They were drunks, but they could be trusted. Not like all those new people with nose rings and tattoos. All right, Greg, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I really don't know what to make of that. It's an awfully specific recitation of something that Andy McCabe says he heard. I suspect that
on that issue and many others, McCabe's credibility will live or die by the notes that he undoubtedly took about those conversations and the extent to which he returned to the FBI building across the street after such meetings and told others exactly what he heard. And so I suspect we're going to hear more about that, and we're going to probably hear McCabe's corroborating evidence. But that, needless to say, on its face is a very disturbing statement by the former Attorney General.
Well, Greg Miller.
But guys, I think that they don't have a relationship. That's the one thing to note here. Sessions and McCabe weren't buddies. They're not drinking together. They're not having frank conversations like this. I agree with Greg. It's oddly specific. But the Achilles heel of this book for McCabe is that he was fired, and the way he was fired so unceremoniously just hours before he was set to receive his pension after a 20-plus decorated career at the FBI. And so people who support Sessions and Rosenstein at the Justice Department can constantly point to that as that he has an axe to grind here. He has a reason that he's going after these guys. But again, at the same time, just because Sessions and Rod and all of them said some allegedly, problematic things to him doesn't mean that they're not true. Right. But it just gives them such an easy way out because of how everything went down with how McCabe was fired.
Josh, let me ask you this, because one of the things, and I haven't read the book, very few have. Greg Miller of the Washington Post is someone who has, and what he says is it paints a picture of the Justice Department. There's become this notion out there that the White House, when Donald Trump came to power, not ready for prime time, a place of chaos, that chaos very much extended to justice. And these criticisms of Jeff Sessions are in line with that. You were in the FBI underneath Justice at the time. Was it chaotic?
No. So I've used that. I've heard that word said that there was chaos, especially after the firing of James Comey, and Greg knows this as well. And I won't speak for Greg, but I'll say that my perception afterwards was it wasn't a sense of chaos. It was people saying, okay, now let's move on. Obviously, we have a job to do here. We need to continue to conduct investigations. That's what the American people expect of us. Now, to be sure, there were people inside the FBI that were concerned about what the president was doing and was this possible obstruction of justice. But it wasn't as though people were running around with their hair on fire. It was a very methodical approach. Okay, what do we do next? So, however this is described in the book, again, a lot of us who actually lived it are going to look at it and try to decide, was this really the experience that we lived?
Josh, Greg, Laura, thank you very much. So Democrats are expecting a full House for the first presidential primary debates.
Olsen twins?
Yeah.
Not that kind of full house?
Not that kind
John
of.
Stamos?
Not your favorite kind of full house, no. A different kind of full house. And there are new rules that they are setting up for these debates. No, John, there's nothing about that full house. The DNC chairman, Tom Perez, is going to join us with their new plan and how many debates they're going to have.
This is CNN Breaking News.
The 2020 Democratic field continues to grow. How many more people will join those faces that you see on your screen right now? And we do have some new details about the debate schedule for the Democratic side. The very first Democratic debates will be spread over 2 nights, back to back. The DNC has just announced the details. The first debate will be held in June. The second debate will be this July. That one will be hosted by CNN. And there are new rules for how candidates can qualify to get on that stage. Joining us now is Tom Perez. He's the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Chairman Perez, good morning.
Always great to be with you.
Great to have you. So how do they qualify? What's the criteria for getting on the stage now?
Well, this is unprecedented because in the past, the only thing that happened was polling. That's the only way to get on the stage. We have a polling criteria, but we also have a grassroots fundraising criteria because we really want to reward campaigns that are investing in the grassroots. So if you are, and we came up with this criteria by taking a look at the public financing laws that have been on the books for decades. We modernized them. We consulted with Act Blue, which is basically the grassroots Democratic Party fundraising epicenter. And so if you have shown that you can raise money in the grassroots, 65,000 unique donors, and you have to have 200 donors, a minimum of 200 donors in 20 states, then you can get on the stage.
Okay.
And it's now this won't be easy. It's not a layup, but it's not a full court shot.
Okay.
And we're very excited about this because again, this is unprecedented. We want to make sure that if you're out there connecting with the grassroots, you can get on the debate stage. I think it's also really important, and we're excited to be partnering with CNN, having 2 consecutive nights, prime time, weeknights,
yeah,
and also the fact that we will be randomly selecting the how you participate.
Yes,
so
I want to ask you about that, the randomized aspect. There'll be no kids' table, as was described last time around on the Republican side. In other words, there's not an A team and a B team. You're mixing it all up over those 2 nights.
You know, we have spectacular candidates, and we want to give them an opportunity to show the American people their vision. People say, well, you have a large field. I say, absolutely, we have a great field. And by having random selection for the first 2 debates and having the first 2 debates on consecutive nights, I think these are going to be 2 of the most widely watched debates, frankly, in American history, because it's never been done this way before.
I want to ask you about the field. How many people are you planning for?
Well, we can hold up to 20 people in these 2 debates because, again, consecutive nights.
So
we've
10
had 10.
each. And
right.
Do you think there will be 20 candidates?
Time will tell, but we wanted to make sure we were able, if necessary, to accommodate a large field. And again, it's not simply saying you're going to run for president. You're going to have to meet these criteria. So you got to get out there and run a national campaign. And that's why our grassroots fundraising criteria, I think, really promotes that. We saw Barack Obama in 2008. That one key to his success was he totally energized our grassroots. And this is designed to help do that, this format.
I mean, if there's more than 20 candidates, obviously then your criteria will kick in and you'll have to figure out who's raised the most grassroots funds and polling.
Sure, I mean, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it, and we have contingencies for that. But I'll tell you, the thing that excites me the most is being able to have 2 nights in a row on prime time where the candidates can talk directly to the American people. And we're going to be talking about issues. There's going to be no discussion about hand size. We're going to be talking about health care. We're going to be talking about good jobs that pay a middle-class wage. We're going to be talking about how we bring down the cost of prescription drugs and make sure if you have a pre-existing condition, you can keep your health care. That's what these debates are going to focus on, and I think the American people are going to see the depth of our field. They're going to see the differences between what we are doing as Democrats, what we are fighting for, and what this president is fighting against. We need to win in 2020, and I think this format is going to help us do exactly that.
Okay, I want to ask you about the DNC's position on what President Trump is planning today, and that is to declare a national emergency to get, we're told, $8 billion to build his wall circumnavigating Congress.
Well, satisfying Rush Limbaugh and making sure you have a political trophy is not a national emergency. This is ridiculous. He will face problems in the Congress, and he will face problems in the court, because the Congress, I'm confident, will take up a resolution of disapproval. Once the House does it, the Senate must do it. You heard so many Republicans in the run-up to this most recent invented crisis of the president say, you should not do this. Republicans have done this. So once you pass it, the resolution of disapproval in the House, it will go to the Senate. And those Republicans in the Senate who said he should not do this, this will be a put up and shut up moment for them. And again, I have no doubt that this will then go to the courts. And again, justifying a national emergency because Rush Limbaugh is chattering in your ear, that's just not the definition of a national emergency. This is ridiculous, but he's got to satisfy his base and scratch that itch.
Chairman Tom Perez, thank you very much for sharing all of the details of the debates and more with us.
Thank you.
Okay, programming note, Democratic candidate Senator Amy Klobuchar will take part in a CNN town hall with Don Lemon this Monday at 10 p.m. in New Hampshire.
So did the NFL court NBA Commissioner Adam Silver to jump sports? Details in the